Imagine walking into a room filled with nearly 800 of the most powerful military minds in the United States, generals, admirals, and strategists who have shaped modern American warfare, when suddenly the president steps up to the podium and says something that sounds like it came straight out of World War II, announcing that the United States is seriously considering bringing back heavily armored steel battleships instead of relying on lightweight aluminum warships. And in that moment, the entire future of naval warfare quietly begins to shake. On September 30th, 2025, at the Marine Corps base in Quantico, Virginia, this was not a symbolic speech or a nostalgic fantasy, but a direct challenge to decades of U.S. Navy doctrine, because for over 40 years the Navy has built its fleet around speed, stealth, sensors, and digital dominance, believing that seeing the enemy first and striking from long range mattered more than surviving direct hits. Modern destroyers and cruisers are packed with advanced radar, missile systems, and electronic warfare tools, but to achieve this, designers made a trade-off by using aluminum alloys in upper structures to reduce weight and improve stability, allowing ships to move faster and carry massive sensor arrays without becoming dangerously top-heavy. However, aluminum has always carried a hidden cost, one burned deeply into naval memory when the USS Belknap collided with the USS John F. Kennedy in 1975. Causing a fire so intense that the aluminum superstructure melted, collapsed, and killed 7 sailors, turning a warship into a warning that still echoes inside the Pentagon today. That single incident planted a long-lasting fear that in a missile-heavy modern war, American ships might be incredibly deadly but dangerously fragile, able to strike first but unable to survive sustained punishment, essentially becoming what critics now call glass cannons. The president's remarks tap into that fear by questioning whether today's sleek, high-tech ships can survive a future conflict against a peer rival like China, which is rapidly expanding its navy and building powerful warships at a pace not seen since World War II. The proposal being whispered about in Washington is not about restoring old Iowa-class battleships like museum pieces, because those ships are decades old with worn engines and outdated systems, but about creating something entirely new, a 21st century battleship built around survival rather than invisibility. This theoretical ship would weigh around 20,000 tons or more, possibly even larger, covered in 6 inches of solid steel armor, powered by nuclear reactors, and armed not with giant cannons firing powder shells, but with hundreds of missile cells, railguns capable of firing projectiles at hypersonic speeds, and high-energy lasers designed to shoot down incoming threats. The idea is radical because it flips modern naval thinking upside down, shifting from avoiding hits to absorbing them, from hiding to dominating the battlefield through presence alone. Yet this vision clashes directly with the Navy's current strategy of distributed maritime operations, which spreads firepower across many smaller ships and unmanned vessels so no single loss becomes catastrophic, because concentrating power in one massive platform creates a tempting target that could result in thousands of casualties and billions of dollars lost in seconds. The Navy prefers a mosquito fleet of smaller, cheaper ships and drones that are hard to detect and easy to replace, believing that numbers and flexibility win wars rather than size and armor. Supporters of battleships argue that this approach lacks psychological impact, because unmanned vessels and stealthy destroyers do not project power the way a massive steel warship looming off an enemy coast does, and history shows that fear itself can be a weapon, as seen in 1991, when Iraqi troops reportedly surrendered simply after seeing the USS Missouri operating nearby. They claim the Navy has traded intimidation for efficiency, forgetting that in global politics, the image of unstoppable strength can prevent wars before they begin. However, bringing battleships back is not just a strategic decision, but an engineering nightmare, because American shipyards have not produced battleship-grade steel armor since 1945, and many of the factories that once forged such materials no longer exist, meaning the U.S. would need to rebuild industrial capabilities from scratch before even laying the keel of such a ship. Power presents another challenge, because a modern battleship would require massive electrical output to run railguns and laser defenses, making nuclear reactors almost unavoidable. But placing nuclear reactors inside a ship designed to take direct hits introduces serious risks, since damage to the reactor could turn a battlefield loss into an environmental disaster. Then, there is the crew problem, perhaps the most serious issue of all, because traditional battleships required nearly 2,000 sailors to operate, while modern destroyers function with around 300, and the U.S. Navy is already facing its worst recruitment crisis in history, struggling to fill positions on existing ships. Automation could reduce crew size, but fewer sailors also mean weaker damage control, and in naval combat, ships are often saved not by armor, but by crews fighting fires, sealing compartments, and keeping systems alive after taking hits. A massive ship with a skeleton crew might survive the initial impact of a missile, but without enough hands on board, flooding and fires could still doom it. Meanwhile, China continues to build warships at record speed, deploying large Type 055 destroyers, and developing vast coastal missile networks designed specifically to destroy large surface ships before they can approach contested waters. Critics argue that no amount of steel can protect against modern hypersonic missiles traveling at Mach 10, because the kinetic energy alone would shatter armor, making passive defense obsolete and forcing navies to rely on active defense systems instead. That shift is exactly why the U.S. Navy moved toward missile interception rather than armor. But this introduces another problem: cost, because shooting down a $20,000 drone with a $2 million missile is not sustainable in a long war. Battleship supporters argue that armored ships equipped with railguns and conventional weapons could flip this economic equation, forcing enemies to waste expensive missiles on heavily protected targets, while the battleship returns fire with relatively cheap ammunition. In this view, a battleship becomes not just a weapon, but an economic trap, draining the enemy's resources while shielding more fragile assets like aircraft carriers operating farther back. What we are witnessing is a clash between two philosophies of warfare, one driven by technocrats who believe networks, stealth, and unmanned systems define the future, and another driven by a more traditional belief that survival, presence, and brute strength still matter when technology fails. The so-called Golden Fleet concept attempts to merge these ideas by envisioning massive steel ships packed with hundreds of missile cells that can strike from long range while still surviving direct hits, acting as both shield and sword in a future war. But building such ships would require political courage, massive funding, industrial revival, and perhaps most difficult of all, admitting that decades of naval design choices may have prioritized efficiency over survivability. Although the president's words were delivered in a single speech, in the world of military planning, statements from the commander-in-chief often act as quiet orders, and design teams may already be revisiting old concepts, running simulations, and debating whether steel should once again define naval power. Younger officers tend to favor drones, swarms, and networks, while older sailors remember fires, damage control, and the comfort of thick steel between them and the ocean, because when satellites are blinded, electronics are jammed, and missiles run dry, naval warfare still comes down to one brutal truth. One ship floats, and one ship sinks, and history shows that the one with thicker skin often survives. The push to bring back battleships may be controversial, expensive, and technically difficult, but it taps into a deep, almost primal desire within the military to be unstoppable rather than merely efficient, raising a question that could define the future of naval warfare itself. So now the choice is yours to consider. In a future war against a powerful rival like China, would you rather sail on a sleek aluminum destroyer that relies on not being seen, or on a massive steel warship designed to take the hit and keep fighting? Does armor still matter in an age of hypersonic missiles and drone swarms? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more deep, easy to understand military analysis like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.